The chain attached to my handcuffs didn't allow me to sit back as far as I wanted in the uncomfortable metal folding chair. I didn't glare at Detective Tucker. I didn't complain. I made myself still and held his gaze levelly. A small, measured smile on my face as he set up a recorder and a microphone. All the equipment looked like stuff you'd find in any average teenager's bedroom nowadays. Detective Brad Tucker was, or at least had been in his younger years, a tough man, highly intelligent, a worthy adversary. Doubts form in my mind about his worthiness as he set up the recording equipment, though. He wanted to know all about my crimes, as he put it. And that might not be the best idea for his mental well-being, but if the man wants to know, well, I'm obliged to enlighten him. If it breaks his mind, well now, he asked for it, didn't he? Settling into his own metal folding chair, Detective Tucker adjusts his badge on his police department issued t-shirt that had Unico PD written across the front in big bold letters. His bald head was as pale as his face under the one fluorescent light above the table, and his eyes, though dark and intelligent, seemed to dance in the shadows thrown by that light. Was he nervous? Yeah, I think so. I think he was nearly sick with nerves, but the detective in him just had to know. What made me do all those horrible things? What madness drove a man like me? What fouled up wiring in my brain could possibly be responsible for the atrocities as he saw them? Would he have believed me if I told him that I wasn't insane or deranged, but that I was thinking very clearly, possibly more clearly than ever before, when I killed all those people? Nah, not for a split second. I doubt he'd believe it. Placing his heavily muscled arms on the table, he leaned forward and squinted his eyes at me, as if studying my face intently for some sign that the crazy had leaked out and was showing. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, he shifted in his seat. He pushed the button on the video recorder, and then one on the audio recorder, and scooted the mic a little closer to me before speaking. This is Detective Brad Tucker for the Unico Police Department. I'm speaking with a Bales Everett Marlowe, who is the only suspect in a string of unsolved murders committed between the years 1999 and 2018. Looking directly at me, he said, Mr. Marlowe has agreed to reveal the nature and details of his crimes to me at this time. Mr. Marlowe is aware that he is being recorded and agrees to continue with the interview. Is this correct, Mr. Marlowe? Tucker looked at me for confirmation. Yes, Detective Tucker. I know I'm being recorded, and I agreed to continue with my story. Mr. Marlowe, start at the beginning and tell me about your crimes. Tucker sat back slowly and crossed his massive arms over his stomach, as if relaxed, when I knew he was anything but relaxed. I'd be delighted. I sat straight in my chair, and I really do enjoy telling my story. It all started in 1975 when I was born. Immediately, Tucker stopped me. Not that far back. Just the crimes. The crimes are all I'm interested in hearing from you. His glare was stormy. Oh, well, yes, of course. Just the crimes. That word was so distasteful to me, and it still leaves a bitter taste on my tongue. In 1999, at the age of 24, I lured Janice Taylor to my farm out near the North Carolina border of Unico. I believe you know where that is, Detective. Anyway, I lured her there under the guise of giving her a summer job. You see, she wanted to go to college the next spring and needed the money. She also wanted the experience of working with the farm animals, my livestock, because she wanted to be a veterinarian. My God, that girl could talk too. She chattered incessantly on the ride from my house out to the farthest barn. I practically knew her entire life history, and that of her family by the time I parked the truck and she got out. Some people are just so open. Yeah, she was one of them. She was much more open by the time I'd finished with her. I couldn't help it. The play on words was funny, and had Tucker not been such a bore, he would have laughed too. But he didn't, and I stopped laughing. Knowing that there is nothing but hundreds of acres of government land between my barn and the nearest town, which is North Carolina, satisfied me that I'd not been discovered in what I was about to do. I ushered her into the barn to see the first of the livestock she would be caring for. The inside of the barn was dark after the brightness of the summer sun outside, and she faltered for the first time since I met her a week earlier. It was the first time she'd maybe thought something wasn't exactly on the up and up with this particular job offer. The fear settled in her big blue eyes, but I smiled reassuringly as I pulled the large door closed and dropped the wooden slat into the locking brackets. I was getting lost in the memory and my words trailed off. I was in no real hurry, so I let the memory come and lived in it for a moment. It's so dark in here, Bales, I can't see. Maybe I should just wait here a minute, huh? She'd been very scared. She backed up 2 steps from me as I approached. No, don't be afraid. That's no way to become a veterinarian, is it? I laughed, and she forced a laugh. I held out my hand like a big brother would have. Take my hand, Janice. I'll lead you to the light. It's just over here. I pointed toward the stalks on the far right side. Nodding, but still terrified, she reluctantly took my hand and let me lead her, only balking twice to the large open stall. There's only 1 horse and 1 cow in here, Bales. Where are the other animals? I let go of her hand and closed the tall stall gate, throwing the bolt in the lock. When I turned to her, she knew she made a grave mistake and began screaming. The sound of those screams traveled through the years and touched my soul as I sat there facing Tucker. I had a time shaking the memory off so I could continue. I showed her to a large empty stall with a concrete floor. She realized what was happening too late. Impaling her to the back wall with a pitchfork was easier than I thought it would be. She stood there struggling with the tines through her neck, looking at me with confusion in her eyes as she had no idea of what just happened. And then, the damnedest thing, she reached for me with blood all over her pale little hands and mouthed, "Help me, Beals." As if I hadn't been the one who just stuck the pitchfork right through her. Well, now I pulled it out, and she stumbled towards me. I sidestepped, and she actually turned to face me. and I rammed the pitchfork into the soft tissue of her belly. I did this 3 times before she fell. You know, it takes a hell of a lot to kill people. She was one. I thought she'd die quick after all that, but I finally had to cut her throat about 20 minutes later. Now at this point, Tucker looked shocked and sicker than before. Let me continue, Tucker. I'm not done yet. I cut off her arms and legs and hung them to drain all the blood while I cut open her torso. The flies started coming to feast immediately, and I knew he would show up soon. I worked fast and hard. The zinc tub in the other stall was all set up and filled with water so I could boil the flesh and nasty from the bones of her limbs. I had earmarked them to begin a shrine to him. Tucker cleared his throat. Beals, who is he? Who is him? Who are you talking about? He is Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies, cleanser of earth, bringer of man's salvation, is who he is. He chose me to lead people to salvation through him. The flies are the harbingers of salvation for all of you unclean slobs. They could clean the uncleanable, save the unsavable, and make right the unrighteous. Looking away from me, Tucker rubbed his face with his palms. What does this Beelzebub look like, Mr. Marlowe? What does he look like? Tucker, what does he look like? These are your questions. He's a giant fly, of course. He's the father of all flies, of course. I could hardly believe he didn't know. So, he's a figment of your fevered imagination. Tucker scribbled on the paper. Oh no, detective. He's as real as you or me. And you'll meet him someday. But you don't have to worry. He only takes the unclean, the unrighteous, and you, well, you are both clean and righteous, detective. Closing his eyes and taking a few deep breaths, Tucker said, Continue. Next crime, Mr. Marlowe, if you will. See, that's what I'm talking about, detective. You could besmirch yourself, muck up your pristine and righteous ways by taking me in hand and killing me. But you won't, because you're clean and righteous, and he hasn't chosen you to do his work. I'm his chosen, so none of the dirty sticks to me. I'm killing in his honor, for him, with him, doing his work. So me? Well, I'm safe. Shaking his head, Tucker continued to scribble on the pad of paper. Continue. So, Janice was done and she fed the flies for months before they finally quit coming to her. I used her limbs as the foundation stones of my shrine to Beelzebub. The unconscious flinch of Tucker's face let me know that he didn't care much for the shrine he'd found on my property. I'd even built a temple around it, large and convoluted so Beelzebub would come and go through the maze-like halls and rooms as he pleased, and not be seen unless he wanted to be seen. That was the first and last time I killed anyone in the barn. It was far too risky. I hadn't counted on the smell of rotting flesh carrying on the wind like it did, nor on the buzzard that circled above and non-stop for over a week. The coyotes and bobcats circled the barn at night, seeking entrance, and I happened upon them more than once as I guarded the place. Janice was the only one that year. In 2000, however, there were 6 sacrifices to Beelzebub. 24 more limbs to add to the shrine. I lured each one to my property with the promise of work, money, drugs, or whatever they most desired at that moment. And let me tell you, it's amazing how easily the human soul can become tainted with these desires that cause them to become a source of empowerment for Beelzebub. Young Danny Brown wanted more than anything to commit to a summer of wild parties, sex with as many young women as possible, and doing nothing constructive before moving to Oregon to take over his family's logging business in November. He never made it to even one wild party. Like the others, he became a feast for my god, a feast for flies. He succumbed to Beelzebub with only one blow from my hammer. You never found his head, did you, detective? Tucker only glared at me under the sickly light of the ancient fluorescent and thumped his pen against the paper relentlessly. After Beelzebub and his hordes of flies feasted on the bodies, I was taxed with making them disappear, except the limbs, which I had ceased boiling clean, so that the flies that came late looking for sustenance still had something to eat too. Do you know what I did with those torsos, detective? He did not. I knew this, but wanted to needle him, loosen him up a little. And after all, I had some news that might interest him greatly. It would surely test his righteousness. I chuckled at his almost imperceivable headshake. You should check under things. Under bodies of water, under the floors of caves, under the houses of missing girls. Ah, and there it was, that knee-jerk reaction I had been looking for as Tucker pinned me with his flaming stare. He wanted to know, he wanted to ask, but didn't quite dare yet. He wasn't ready for the truth. Is there something you want to ask me, detective? I smiled and leaned back, feeling the power of the fly god surging through me. Under things, in what locations, Mr. Marlowe? He averted his gaze and gripped the pen much too tightly, the muscles in his forearm flexing. You know where. The smell is the worst, but once you get used to it, disposing of human torsos isn't too hard. You just have to understand how decaying things work, and then you're set. The smell, though, putrid, high and sickly sweet, carrying on the wind. That will get you caught before you're ready to be caught. And there it was again, that darting, flaming look pinning me to my chair. You're saying you wanted to be caught. His cheeks had reddened, and little beads of sweat stood out on his forehead. I nodded. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here with me now. I promise you that, detective. Taking a trembling, tight breath, Tucker asked, how many victims between 2002 and 2018? He looked intently at his paper. 3, each year for the years 2002 through 2010. 2 each year for 2011 through 2016. 1 in 2017. And 5 for 2018. I could play his game, stoic and straight to business. No pleasure, no small talk, only business, and his business at the moment was numbers. I was happy to give only that for the time being. I watched as he flipped through the file, knowing he was comparing the known victims to the list I'd just given. It didn't match up. He didn't know about all the sacrifices from 2018. In fact, they only knew about one of them. The first one, a friend to his own lovely daughter. How nightmarishly close I'd come to his own home. Before he could ask me about it, I volunteered the information. You only know about Megan Laurie in 2018. I know, but you haven't been studying the pattern correctly lately. You're all too stuck on the past to see how the pattern evolved. Don't say Megan's name. You don't have the right to say her name, you monstrous bastard. His voice was low and gravelly, and I'd struck a nerve and he'd responded. Where are the other victims from 2018, Mr. Marlowe? He spat my name the way you would spit bitter liquid from your mouth. They are, how should I put this? I thought how best to word my next phrase, though that it would not be a lie, and it would be appropriate. They're being prepared for a special feast. The Grand Feast of Flies happens this year, and as with any special event, it takes much preparation. Who are the victims? He armed sweat from his face. His color was high red and had spread to his bald head now. Names? Oh, I can't give you those. Do your job, detective. I'm disappointed in you, really. I will. He slammed his pen onto the pad of paper, stood, flipped off both recording devices, and motioned at the two-way mirror. Tucker's partner, Harold Bannerman, entered the room. Want me to put him back in his cell, Tuck? Bannerman was younger, cockier, and he was not righteous at all. Yes, please and thanks. Tucker held the door so Bannerman could lead me out, and then he fell into step behind us. As we passed an open office, I saw a board announcing the most recent missing persons in the area, and I stopped. Pictures were plainly visible to all three of us. Bannerman whacked knuckles upside my head. Come on, Beals. He yanked hard on my handcuffs. And over my shoulder, I said to Tucker, You should look under houses of missing girls, you know. Tucker stopped in his tracks, and I imagined the block of ice that had just settled in his gut as he looked back at that missing persons board. The photo at the top was his very own sweet daughter who'd gone missing last month, long before they had me in custody. Bannerman slammed me into a wall and gut-punched me hard. He bloodied my mouth with his next punch. Keep it shut, or next time teeth will be missing. He dragged me toward my tiny, solitary cell. The visage of Detective Tucker as the realization set in about his beautiful but very tainted daughter kept me company, and will continue to do so until our next meeting. And that meeting will be very soon, I dare say.